Hey guys, tonight we crawl into the deep, dark belly of the earth to stare into a mystery so old it makes the pyramids look like toddlers. A mystery carved in flickering torchlight, painted with animal fat and crushed stone, and left behind by hands that have long since turned to dust. We're going into a cave. Not just any cave, the cave. A place of shadows and secrets, where art began, and where something far stranger may have happened. The air is still here. Not silent exactly, but thick with a hush, like the space before thunder. You can hear your own breathing loud in your ears. The faint scuff of your boots on the calcite floor. There's a chill. Not the kind that comes from a cold breeze, but the kind that seeps into your bones from the stone itself. You are descending. The world of sunlight, of bird song and breeze and modern worries is behind you now. Your hand tightens around the stone lamp. It's small, shallow, carved from a chunk of limestone. A little pool of rendered reindeer fat fuels the dim orange flame. It flickers as you duck into a narrow passage, so narrow you have to turn sideways. The rock brushes against your shoulders and your pack. This isn't a gallery, it's a birth canal. You squeeze through, scraping and ducking and breathing in damp stone and ancient dust. And then you stop. Your flame has caught something. It's not random, not natural. A line. Soft, curved, deliberate. Not a crack or stain. This was drawn. And now your eyes start to adjust. The line becomes a back. The back curves into a flank. A bulging shoulder. A single, powerful horn. It's a bison. Not just any bison. A ghost of a bison, built from shadow and ochre and the stone's natural bulge. You move your lamp just slightly, and the illusion strengthens. It moves, it breathes. You keep walking, and then you step into the great hall. The chamber is large, though your light barely reaches the ceiling. It stretches in both directions, and the walls, they pulse with life. A thunder of hooves frozen in silence. Great aurochs, massive wild cattle, barrel across the stone, their horns curling in elegant arcs. Beside them, delicate horses with flowing manes gallop mid-stride. Stocky bison twist their heads in strange animated poses. A woolly rhinoceros rears. All of them rendered not crudely, but exquisitely. You take a breath. You didn't even notice you were holding it. Each figure is placed with intention. The rock isn't just a backdrop. It's part of the art. A rise becomes a shoulder. A hollow suggests a belly. And the colors, deep browns, blacks, and ochres, shaded to give depth and weight. These aren't doodles. They're masterpieces, the kind you'd expect from someone with years of training, a palette of tools, and maybe a full scholarship to a Paleolithic art school. But here's the catch. This was made 20,000 years ago, by someone with a handful of pigment, a flickering lamp, and a rock wall. Historians still argue whether these paintings were collaborative efforts, passed down like family heirlooms, or the work of solitary geniuses. Either way, they challenge everything we assume about our early ancestors. These were people with imagination, precision, and purpose. You stand there in awe. It feels like you've stepped into a cathedral. But instead of saints and martyrs, you are surrounded by beasts. And instead of stained glass, there is ochre and charcoal, whispering across the walls. The chamber hums with sacred silence. You sense this place wasn't made just for viewing. It was for being transformed. You might be wondering, why animals? Why so many? It's almost overwhelming, this bestiary of motion and spirit. Horses, deer, bulls, even lions in some caves. But one thing's missing. You don't see you. No human figures striding proudly among the beasts. No self-portraits. No smiling group shots around the fire with thumbs up and mammoth ribs. Just animals. Again and again. But for now, you don't notice the absence. For now, you're simply entranced. This cave is a sanctuary. Not of silence, exactly, but of something deeper. A hush made of reverence. The kind that settles over you in a great library or under a vast night sky. It makes you feel small in the best possible way. Here the animals are gods, or guides, or memories, and you are a guest. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? I love seeing how far and wide these journeys reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tilt your lamp forward, and the shadows stretch like long limbs ahead. The cave breathes around you. It's time to go deeper. You take one last look at the galloping herd on the walls, then duck back into the winding passage. The animals seem to follow you, echoing behind your eyes. But you're not looking at art anymore. You're stepping into their world. Outside this cave, 20,000 years ago, the planet doesn't look like it does today. The landscape is wide, open, and wild. You picture yourself stepping out of the cave mouth into a vast, sun-drenched steppe. No roads, no farms, no fences, just wind-blown grasses, spindly birch trees clinging to the edges of icy plains, and snow-covered peaks crouching on the horizon. This is the Upper Paleolithic. You tilt your head skyward. The constellations are familiar, but just barely. Polaris hasn't taken its place as the North Star yet. The shapes in the night sky are skewed, like someone has jiggled the cosmic projector. Still, they twinkle above, watching over a world that doesn't know writing, doesn't know wheels, but does know fire, stone, and spirit. And oh, the beasts. You think you know big animals? Think again. You're sharing this planet with creatures that feel like myth-made flesh. Towering woolly mammoths lumber across the tundra, their tusks curling like ivory question marks. Cave lions, larger than any lion alive today, prowl the edges of the herd. Giant ground sloths dig into permafrost with claws the length of your forearm. Irish elk stand tall, their antlers spanning 12 feet like enormous wooden chandeliers. If you squint, it's hard to tell whether you're in the Ice Age or a deleted scene from The Lion King on steroids. And here's what's wild. These were the creatures immortalized in the caves. They weren't just food, they were the cast of a world stage. Elk, reindeer, lions, rhinoceroses, bears, and wild cattle were not just drawn, they were worshipped. They were painted not only with skill, but with love. Which brings you back to that nagging little question. You've been surrounded by art, hundreds of animals. Every bend in the cave reveals more. Another rearing horse, another charging bull, You can almost hear their hooves in your ears. But still, no humans. You pause, lamp raised. You mentally scroll back through every panel you've seen. You've seen death. You've seen movement. You've seen tenderness and ferocity. But you haven't seen yourself. It's weird, right? These were human artists. They had hands, eyes, families, jokes, fears. They must have looked at each other across the fire, shared meat, danced. And yet, in this sprawling, sacred bestiary, they're ghosts. Not once do they say, "Here we are." No proud self-portrait, no smiling hunter with a spear, no mother holding a baby beside the herd. It's as if the very idea of being human was taboo. Historians still argue whether this absence was intentional or just circumstantial. Maybe they did depict people, but those images haven't survived. Maybe they drew them in other places, on wood, on skin, in sand. But only the cave art has lasted. Maybe. But let's be honest, it doesn't feel like an accident. It feels like a rule, and it's not just one cave. Across dozens of sites, across thousands of years, the pattern holds. Where humans appear, they're rare, often abstract, and sometimes unsettling. These people, these brilliant artists who could make a horse flick its tail mid-stride, chose not to depict themselves. Why? Maybe they saw themselves as less important than the animals. Maybe they thought of humanity as just another part of the food chain, no more special than the reindeer or lion. Or maybe they feared their own reflection. There's a theory, call it the animal spirit model, that suggests the cave wasn't about them. It was about them. The others, the ones with hooves and horns and claws. The cave was their space, their temple. You, the human, were just the visitor. Another possibility? They believed depicting people was dangerous, that it captured more than just your image, that it bound your soul. Better to leave the wall to the wild ones. And then there's the spiritual explanation. Maybe they thought the animals were the true messengers, the ones who spoke to the gods. The people who made these paintings weren't trying to tell our story. They were trying to speak with powers much older and deeper. It's also possible, and here's your fringe tidbit for the night, that humans did appear in these paintings, just not entirely as humans. Some archaeologists believe the artists depicted themselves merged with animals, part man, part bison, part bird. Not portraits, but transfigurations. We'll get to that. But for now, all you know is this. The absence is louder than words, louder than hoofbeats. And that absence, it sticks in your brain. You're surrounded by beauty, but there's a current of unease under your feet, under your ribs. Like something's missing, like something's being hidden, like you're being watched, not by eyes painted on the walls, but by the spaces between them. It's a whisper, soft as dust. Don't look for us. And it's this whisper that sets the stage for everything that follows. Because eventually, the humans will appear, just not how you expect. And when they do, well, let's just say, you probably won't sleep as well. You leave behind the thundering hooves and sweeping curves of the grand chamber and press deeper into the rock. The walls close in again. The ceiling lowers. Your flame sputters in the chill, damp air. You have to duck now, move sideways. The echo of your footfalls fades. There's no room for echoes here, just a tunnel into blackness. Something shifts in the mood. You feel it before you see it. The majesty is gone. This is not a gallery, not a place for awe. This is something else, tighter, stranger, less like a cathedral, more like a confession booth. You hold your lamp up, and for the first time, you can't tell what you're looking at. Lines, shapes, they're not animals. They're not beautiful. A row of dots, a ladder-like pattern, a curve with a tick mark. These are the geometric signs, the claviforms and tectiforms and macaronis, as baffling in meaning as they are in name. Some look like fences, others like combs, still others like nothing at all. They repeat across caves and continents, but no one knows what they mean. Historians still argue whether these signs are some kind of code, a visual language, a pre-writing system, or something else entirely. Tally marks, traps, musical notations, trance symbols, or the world's oldest game of tic-tac-toe gone horribly abstract. But then you see something else, something more familiar. It's not clear at first. It's scrawled low on the wall, almost like an afterthought. The lines are rough, angular. They don't move like the bison. They don't breathe. They just hang there. It's a figure, kind of. Two straight legs, a rectangle of a body, two arms sticking out like twigs, and a head? Just a lump, maybe an oval. That's it. It looks like something a 5-year-old might draw in the back of a notebook while bored in math class. And yet, this is one of the few depictions of a human in all of Ice Age art. You stare at it, baffled. It doesn't fit. These were the people who could paint a galloping horse so lifelike you'd reach out to pet its mane. And this stick man, is what they chose to represent themselves. Why? It's not a lack of skill. That's obvious. It's not a lack of time or pigment. The figure is placed with space around it, as if it deserved its own panel. It's not hidden, but it's also not proud. It's not heroic. It's not strong. It's pathetic. There's no motion, no muscle, no magic. It's the opposite of every animal you've seen. While the aurochs tower with power and the lions snarl with life, this human is crude, limp, a joke. Was it meant that way? Maybe. Or maybe it's a warning. You move forward. Another passage, another chamber. Your lamp sways slightly with each breath. The walls here are quieter, fewer images, but then, in the shadows, something new. Another human form. But this one is different. It's lying down, flat on its back, arms sprawled, head tilted awkwardly. It's clearer than the first, still simple, still more stick than flesh, but unmistakably human. And something's happening to it. It's being pierced. Long, sharp lines stab through the torso. One through the chest, one through the thigh, another through the arm. You count. 2, 3, 7. This isn't a hunt. This isn't chaos. This is precise, deliberate. It's hard to breathe for a second, not because you're scared, but because you weren't expecting this. You came here for beauty, for mystery. You expected handprints and horses. What you're seeing is something else. It's violence, cold, quiet, etched in stone for eternity. What kind of people come into the dark and use their precious pigments not to celebrate life, but to record death? And this death isn't symbolic. It isn't mythic. It's specific, anatomical, forensic. You crouch closer. There's something uncanny in how the figure tilts, as if caught mid-fall, legs rising off the ground, arms slack. It's not heroic. It's not dramatic. It's just dead. And the style? Still crude, just like the stickman. Still that same angular, stunted posture. Still that lack of expression, of grace. It's not a failure of skill. It's a refusal to dignify the human form. And this is the thread tying it all together. The humans, when they finally appear, aren't shown as proud or strong or sacred. They are victims, caricatures, ghosts. If animals were the gods of the cave, humans were its sinners, or its prey. That quiet terror from before? It's louder now, closer. Because something in your gut is starting to say, they didn't just avoid depicting themselves. They feared what it meant. Maybe the human body was taboo, too powerful, too sacred, too dangerous to show in full. Or maybe the act of being human was fraught, conflicted, something they didn't want to celebrate, but had to acknowledge. And when they did, they made it ugly. One of the fringe theories, whispered among certain researchers, is that this was a form of ritual humiliation, that to depict a human was to strip them of power, to render them as less than animals, less than real, like the gods had turned their faces away. Whatever the reason, you now know this. When the human appears, it's not to say, "Here I am." It's to say, "This is what happens." And you haven't even seen the worst of it yet. Now leave this cave behind. Not forever, just for a moment. You're still underground, still moving by the flicker of a stone lamp. But the rock around you has changed. It's smoother here, more like melted wax than craggy bone. You've traveled, hundreds of miles by modern reckoning, thousands of years by the measure of paint and pigment. This is Cognac, a different cave, a different story. You shuffle along a damp limestone corridor, your hand trailing across flowstone curtains, thin, rippling sheets of rock that look like draped fabric. They shimmer faintly in your lamplight, like ghost silk. And then you see it, a great deer. Megalocaros, the giant of its kind. Its antlers stretch like lightning across the stone. It's rendered with care, with grace. You recognize the style immediately. That same quiet reverence, that same gift of motion stilled in ochre. But something's off, because inside its body, there's something else. At first it looks like a smudge. You lean closer. It's a figure. It's been placed in between the deer, head down, legs curled awkwardly, like it's falling or melting into the animal's body. And from the figure's side, 3 sharp lines. Spears? Wounds? Ritual marks? Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual merging or a violent rejection. Did this person become the deer, or was the deer consuming them? Is it a symbolic death, a divine punishment, or just a mistake? You take a step back, then a step to the right, and that's when you see it, just a few feet away. There's no deer this time, no blending, no ambiguity, just a human figure, crude, stick-like, angled as if falling or flinching, and pierced. This time, not 3 lines, but 7. Long, straight, unmistakable. 2 in the chest, 1 in the thigh, 1 through the arm. The others angled in like stakes around a scarecrow. They are not jagged or accidental. They're clinical, purposeful, a careful arrangement of pain. This isn't art. This is documentation. You're staring at a 25,000-year-old murder scene. You try to blink it away. Tell yourself it's just another animal, poorly drawn. But your brain won't play along. This figure isn't just dead. It's been executed. The lines don't radiate out like in a battle scene. They converge inward. They target. This isn't chaos. It's choreography. And the figure's posture, arms slightly raised, one leg bent, it doesn't read as someone who fell. It reads as someone brought down, deliberately, in front of witnesses. Suddenly, the cave doesn't feel sacred anymore. It feels procedural. As if once, long ago, someone walked into this chamber carrying a torch, some pigment, and a memory too heavy to speak aloud. So they put it here, on this wall, because to speak it might be forbidden, but to paint it? That's different. This is the turning point. This is where the beautiful cave art narrative collapses, because Cognac isn't here to show you a hunt, or a prayer, or a vision. It's here to show you a death. And not just any death, a killing with intent, a killing with rules. It's the silence that makes it worse. There are no wailing figures, no cries of battle, just this frozen moment. The body, the lines, the act. You lean back, the calcite cool against your spine, and you realize this wasn't hidden in some corner. It was made to be seen. There's a fringe interpretation, whispered among the more cautious scholars, that this was part of a rite, a punishment, a lesson, a warning to others. That this wall was a kind of court record. The only surviving receipt for justice? Paleolithic style. One theory suggests that these killings were ritual, acts carried out not in vengeance, but in accordance with the tribe's spiritual law. That when someone broke a taboo, something truly terrible, they weren't just punished. They were painted, marked for eternity. But here's the real horror. You'll never know who that person was. You'll never know what they did or didn't do. You'll never hear their side. You're standing in front of the oldest cold case in the world, and there's no jury left to question. Just you. Just the wall. Some archaeologists recoil from this interpretation. They say, no, it must be symbolic. A vision. A myth. Anything but this. Because if we accept that this is murder, premeditated and recorded, then everything we assumed about peaceful prehistoric people goes up in torch smoke. Remember the stick man from before? He felt like a joke. This figure? It's not funny anymore. It's the same shape. Same crude style. But now, every awkward line feels loaded, intentional. There's no need for realism when the message is this stark: humans die. And sometimes other humans make that happen. The reverence you felt in the Hall of the Bulls has curdled. The silence you once called sacred now feels like something else entirely. It feels like secrecy, like shame, or worse, like ritual. You lower your lamp. You step back. You try not to imagine the moment itself. The screams, the crowd, the last breath, the artist kneeling in the dark, brushing charcoal across the rock. But you do. Of course you do. Because once you've seen this, you can't unsee it. You step out of Cognac's shadows feeling a little different. Like something followed you. Not a sound, not a ghost, just a thought, a tension. You try to shake it off as you travel again, deeper into France, deeper into time. You're heading for another cave, Peshmerl. If Cognac was cold-blooded, Peshmerl is seductive. It lulls you at first. You descend into the earth again, lamp in hand, and this time the walls greet you with beauty. You pause in front of the dappled horses. They're exquisite. 2 horses rendered in black and white, their speckled bodies mapped across the natural curves of the rock. You could mistake them for modern art, maybe even assume they were made in the 1800s by someone dabbling in pointillism. But no, these were painted more than 25,000 years ago. They use the bulges and shadows of the cave to suggest movement and volume. And they aren't just decorative. Their positioning and patterning are intentional, layered with meaning we no longer understand. It soothes you for a moment. You even smile. Maybe what you saw in Cognac was an anomaly, an outlier, a one-time scene of violence that doesn't represent the whole. Then someone guides you deeper, past the horses, past the handprints, into the places where the ceilings drop and the walls seem to lean in. You're taken to another panel. The lamp flickers, and the feeling returns. There he is. Another human. Flat on his back, arms limp, head tilted, legs parted. You already know what's coming. Lines. They're stabbing into him. Some short, others long. Some enter at an angle. Some go straight in. One pierces the abdomen. One catches the thigh. Another drives through the upper arm. And you count. 1, 2, 3, 5. Maybe more. Some archaeologists say 11. Others argue some of the lines might not be wounds. That maybe they're symbolic? Motion lines, spiritual energy. Maybe. Historians still argue whether this is murder, myth, trance, or something else entirely. But to your eyes, it looks grim, cold, forensic, like someone wanted to show what happened exactly. What's worse is the quality of the drawing. It's clinical, dry, not mournful. There's no drama, no artistry, no glory. Just anatomy and violence, scrawled in the same blunt style as before. It's not that the artist couldn't do better. It's that they chose not to. Why? To diminish the victim? To keep the event from becoming mythologized? Or to signal something even darker? That human suffering didn't deserve beauty? Your lamp shifts, and suddenly you see something new. Next to the figure is a rectangle, a small vertical shape with short lines radiating from it. It's abstract, stylized. It looks oddly like a placard or a bird cage. This is known as an aviform, a bird-like symbol. But no one agrees what it really is. Some think it's a clan mark, a tribal signature. Others say it represents the soul leaving the body, flying away at death. One bold interpretation, it's a shamanic glyph, a badge of power, or a curse marker. A kind of supernatural indictment, etched in shorthand. In this theory, the bird shape doesn't belong to the victim. It belongs to the one who did this. You stare at the pairing, the crude human and the abstract bird. Together they feel intimate, like a signed message, a cause and effect. A declaration that says, "He fell because of me." It sends a shiver up your arms, because if that's true, then this isn't just a murder. It's a ritual, a performance of violence, sanctified by symbols. Some archaeologists have called it the Peshmerl Execution Panel. That's not an official name, of course, but the title sticks because it feels right. This doesn't look like chaos. It looks like justice, or revenge, or sacrifice. And the coldness of it, the way it's laid out with no commentary, no context, makes it more terrifying than any myth or ghost story. Because it's real. At Cognac, you saw a human pierced 7 times. Here, another, with at least 5. This isn't an accident. This is a pattern, a choice. You're standing in a room built by people who came here to remember something. And that something was bloody. Still, a sliver of doubt remains. Could these lines be something else? Could it be a symbolic death? A shaman's journey? You'll get to that. But for now, the evidence points one way, to deliberate human-on-human violence, which, let's be honest, isn't supposed to be here. We love to imagine prehistory as simple, gentle, a world of harmony and stone tools and cave songs. But the deeper you go, the harder it is to believe in that Eden. The people who made these images had the same brains we do. They saw the same stars, felt the same grief, held grudges, and maybe, just maybe, they used caves like courtrooms. Places where crimes were recorded not in words, but in pigment. Places where silence wasn't peace. It was judgment. You sit for a moment on a cool stone shelf, your lamp steady now. The silence returns, but it's changed. It's not the hush of reverence anymore. It's the kind of silence that follows realization. You lean back, exhale, let it settle. 2 caves now, 2 killings. You're starting to see the cracks in the story you were told. The one about peaceful artists sketching animals by firelight, humming lullabies to the rhythm of the hunt. That version feels flimsy now. Too clean. Too modern. And it's not your fault. This myth of the gentle ancient, of the noble savage, has been with us for centuries. Since at least the 17th century, when philosophers like Rousseau idealized the natural state of man as one of peace and harmony. In that romantic vision, civilization was the corrupting force. Laws, cities, ownership, those were the things that led us astray. But what happens when the caves say otherwise? What happens when you find brutality, not in the ruins of cities, but in the roots of human memory? That's what Cognac and Pech-Merle do. They challenge the Eden myth. The archaeologists who first stepped into these caves didn't expect this. They came searching for the sublime, for proof that art was born from awe, from joy, from a connection to the natural world. And in many chambers they found that. But then they found something else. A body, pierced, falling. And then another, and another. They didn't expect murder, and it rattled them. One early French researcher wrote in the margins of his field notes simply, "Pourquoi? Why?" And no one's been able to answer him since. You see, the terror here isn't just the blood, it's the recognition. Because what those paintings whisper isn't, "Look what they did." It's, "Look what we've always been." Violence didn't arrive with cities. It didn't ride in on a chariot or creep in behind the invention of property. It was there before paint, before myth, before even names. And this changes everything. Because if these people, these hunter-gatherers, with their stone tools and their sky maps and their delicate horses, could carry out ritual killings, what else were they capable of? Were they just like us? Or worse? Are we still just like them? Historians still argue whether these acts were exceptions or norms. Were they expressions of tribal justice? Was it rare? Or was it a practice every generation understood? The truth is, we don't know. The record is fragmentary. But even a single case like this, it's enough to make you rethink everything. Let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine you're a Paleolithic elder. You've lived through hard winters, watched people starve, seen friends fall to predators. Your world is small, intense, and personal. Now imagine someone breaks a sacred rule. They steal food during a famine. They lie during a hunt. They trespass in the sacred chamber. Or worse, they paint something they shouldn't. How do you respond? There's no court, no lawyers, no jails. There is only memory and tradition, and a story you don't want to repeat. So maybe the punishment isn't just physical. Maybe it's spiritual. You don't just kill them, you paint them. So others will remember, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. That's the theory anyway. A chilling one. And if it's true, then these caves were never just sanctuaries. They were courts, shrines, graves. But there's another layer to the horror. The images don't scream. They don't dramatize. They whisper, which makes them harder to dismiss. They weren't meant to be propaganda. They weren't meant to impress. They were meant to last. And they have. 25,000 years later, here you are, watching a man fall again and again through time. Not a hero, not a legend. Just a figure, pierced alone. And the style, crude, angular, distant, it leaves no space for redemption. These are not paintings that invite sympathy. They are declarations. That's what rattled those first archaeologists. They were prepared for wonder. They found judgment. And so the myth of the Edenic past began to fracture. No longer could you say with certainty that early humans lived in innocence, free of corruption. The evidence was on the wall, literally. And it gets even darker, because if the impulse to ritualize violence is that old, then what else is? Fear, envy, shame? You look back at the aviform, the strange shape next to the body at Pech-Merle. What was that? A clan mark? A symbol of the soul? A spiritual tattoo on the victim's memory? Or a signature? A cold stamp left by someone who believed what they were doing wasn't murder, but maintenance. The terror in the end isn't the spear. It's the calmness, the quiet line, the still figure. This was no accident. This was the oldest bureaucracy in the world, played out with pigment and firelight. And you've only just begun to scratch the surface. Let's pause, not because it's time to rest, but because the path ahead forks. Two directions, two ways of seeing. You've just followed the trail of a terrifying hypothesis, that those stick figure victims were real, executed, recorded, buried not in earth, but in art. But there's another way to look at them. So tonight, we take the road where metaphor walks beside memory, where symbols bleed into story. But before we go there, let's dwell a little longer on the literal. Let's assume those scenes are exactly what they look like. Murder, not myth, not trance. Just one person killing another with others watching, and one recording. Let's talk about murder in the Paleolithic. It seems unlikely at first. These were small groups, dozens of people at most, stretched thin across icy plains. You'd think survival left no room for conflict, that you'd cherish every warm body you could find. But no, because intimacy breeds intensity. In small groups, there are no strangers. There are only relationships. Every word, every glance, every promise counts. Which means when those relationships break, they shatter hard. Modern anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found something unsettling. While these groups often live without war, without large-scale battles or conquest, they do not live without violence. Feuds, executions, punishments. They don't always fight over land or resources. Sometimes it's honor, or envy, or the breaking of an unspoken rule. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from outside the tribe. It comes from inside. There's a well-documented case among the Kung people of the Kalahari, where a man who repeatedly violated taboos was finally surrounded by his peers and, without ceremony, speared to death. Not in anger, not in chaos, but with a grim, shared understanding that this was necessary. Is that what we're seeing in Cognac and Peshmerl? Picture it. A figure stands alone, accused. Maybe they stole from the food store during the winter. Maybe they violated a sacred animal. Maybe they painted in the wrong chamber. A council forms. The elders speak in low voices. Then a sentence is passed. It's not revenge. It's order. The group must be preserved. The spirit of the tribe must be balanced. And so the punishment is carried out, but it doesn't end there. A painter follows, to document it, to place the act on the wall. Not as spectacle, but as memory, as warning, as law, because without writing, this is the law. The wall remembers. Historians still argue whether these paintings were public displays or hidden knowledge. Were they meant to be seen by all, or only the initiated? Were the caves classrooms or sanctuaries? The idea of law might feel too modern. But think about it. A shared moral code, a system of consequences, a method of remembering wrongs and setting things right. That's law, whether it's written in ink or etched in blood. One fringe theory suggests that these death panels were part of an initiation rite, that young members of the group were brought to see them, not as tourists, but as students. Look, the elder might say, this is what happens when you break the rules. Imagine the effect. A flickering lamp, a still figure, the shadow of your own hand trembling on the wall beside it. You'd remember that lesson for the rest of your life. And maybe that's the point. In a world where life was fragile and memory was the only library, images became law. The cave became courtroom. Punishment became permanence. But here's where it turns. Because for all this talk of law and justice, you still feel uneasy. Something about it doesn't sit right. If these were legal acts, why do they feel so secretive? Why so deep in the cave? Why so crude, so unlike everything else? Why the aviform? Why the silence? You begin to suspect something deeper, something less clean. What if the painting wasn't a memorial? What if it was a confession? What if the artist was not the judge, but the witness? Or worse, the executioner? That idea, that someone came back to this wall alone to leave a record of what they'd done, it sticks with you. It changes the painting from ritual into reckoning. You picture them crouched here, hand shaking, mixing pigment with fat, tracing those long, final lines into the stone. Not to boast, not to warn, but because the memory wouldn't leave them. Because guilt lives in the hand. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. Violence isn't a recent invention. It didn't come with kingdoms or crowns. It came with us, and it's old enough to paint. You climb down now, not just figuratively, physically, into a shaft, a real one. The ceiling disappears and the air grows suddenly colder, as if it's been waiting, untouched, for 20,000 years. You're at Lascaux now, the grand cathedral of cave art. But not the part you've seen on postcards. You're going where almost no one goes, the shaft. You kneel at the edge of the drop, lamp held out over the void. Today they've installed a ladder. Back then, maybe it was ropes. Or maybe just handholds carved into the wall. One misstep and you'd fall 16 feet into pitch blackness. And yet, someone went down there. Someone chose to go there. Not just once, but many times. The stone walls are worn smooth. You begin your descent. Each rung takes you deeper into silence. And it's a different kind of silence. Not just absence of sound, but something more attentive. Like the cave itself is watching. You step off the ladder. The chamber is small, claustrophobic. The air tastes old, metallic. Your lamp dances shadows along the wall. And then you see it. A panel unlike anything else in Lascaux, unlike anything else anywhere. You freeze. Your instincts want to call this a hunting scene, but something in your stomach says no. First, the bison. Massive, furious, and clearly wounded. A long spear juts from its side. Its stomach has been torn open, entrails spilling out in long, dark threads. The detail is almost surgical. You can feel the violence in it. It's not just wounded, it's ruined. To the left, a woolly rhinoceros ambles away, but strangely, it doesn't look startled. There's no panic. It just leaves. It's present, but uninvolved. A bystander, a witness. And then, your eyes find him. The man, or the thing shaped like a man. Crude, simple, just lines, but unmistakable. He's flat on his back, arms outstretched, legs raised stiffly like a marionette dropped mid-performance. He is falling, or has just hit the ground. And here's what stops your breath. His head is not a head, it's a bird. A bird's beak, a pointed shape where a human face should be. Your mind stalls. You've seen crude humans before, but never this. Next to him, a bird perched on a stick. Tall, upright, almost like a totem or a staff. Some say it's a shaman's wand. Others think it's symbolic. A soul, a message, a power animal. And at his feet lies a second spear. Broken. Why is it broken? Why 2 spears? Why the bird? Nothing makes sense. Historians still argue whether this scene is a hunt gone wrong, a trance vision, or a spiritual tableau. It doesn't fit any category neatly. It's not celebratory. It's not tragic. It's just other. And it's not like the rest of Lascaux. The other panels are about animals, movement, beauty. This one is about death. And mystery. And meaning. You feel the wall pressing in, not physically, but mentally. Like it's demanding interpretation. It's like a dream you can't shake, filled with images that resist clarity. What does it mean for a man to wear a bird's head? In most cultures, birds are messengers, between the worlds, between life and death. So maybe this isn't a man dying. Maybe it's a transformation. Or maybe it's both. And what of the bison? Its entrails aren't just painted, they're lovingly rendered, with arcs and curves and internal color. The artist lingered on this. That's not a hunting kill. That's a ritual slaughter. And the rhino? The one who leaves? Some say it's symbolic of a witness turning away, a god who cannot intervene. Or perhaps the entire scene is metaphorical, a vision seen during a trance, a mythic moment reenacted again and again by storytellers, with this wall as their stage. But here's the thing that makes it truly terrifying. You can't explain it. You can't even begin to agree on a story. No 2 archaeologists interpret it the same way. No 2 cultures would. It refuses clarity. And maybe that's the point. Because if it's a vision, a shamanic dream, a moment of spiritual rupture, then of course it doesn't make logical sense. Dreams don't care about linearity. Myths don't obey grammar. And this feels like all three. A myth, a nightmare, a murder. You kneel and stare. Birdman. Gutted bison, silent rhino, totemic stick. The elements are clear. But the meaning? That's buried deep. Somewhere not just in the cave, but in the mind of the person who painted it. And here's a strange little tidbit. This scene is found only in this shaft. To get here, you had to descend, risk injury, enter a place of echo and confinement. Why? Because this scene wasn't for everyone. It was hidden, protected, or maybe forbidden. Maybe only the initiated saw it. Maybe only the brave. Maybe only the guilty. Because this chamber doesn't feel like a gallery. It feels like a tomb. And the painting? It doesn't feel like a record. It feels like a ritual. One that is still echoing in the silence, waiting for someone, like you, to see it. You stay crouched a moment longer in the shaft of Lascaux. Not because you want to, but because standing feels wrong. Too abrupt. Too loud. This space feels like a whisper held between stone and fire, and you've just heard something you weren't supposed to. But maybe someone wanted you to hear it. Not with words, not even with pictures, with something deeper, something primal. Because the bird-headed man, he's not just a mystery. He might be the key. The figure is strange, not fully human, not fully animal. And he's not alone in his oddness. Because what if he isn't just falling? What if he's flying? Let's open a different door tonight. One that leads not into history, but into mind. We turn now to the theory of shamanism. It's one of the most compelling explanations for the weirdness of prehistoric art. The chaos, the visions, the merging of species. And the shaft scene? It might just be its smoking torch. This theory gained traction thanks to researchers like Jean-Claude and David Lewis Williams, who studied both the art and the human brain, and found strange connections. According to their model, the cave paintings aren't illustrations of reality. They're maps of consciousness. Let's break that down. When a human enters a trance, whether through chanting, fasting, drumming, hallucinogens, or just deep meditation, the brain tends to follow a predictable pattern. Across cultures, across time, across geography. Stage 1 is visual. You begin to see basic geometric patterns. Dots, grids, zigzags. These are called entoptic phenomena. They come from the structure of the brain itself, its wiring, its chemistry. And guess what? Caves like Pechmerle and El Castillo are filled with just such signs. Remember those ladders, those rows of dots, those meaningless squiggles? They might not be meaningless at all. They might be visions. Stage 2 is associative. Your brain tries to impose meaning onto the patterns. A zigzag becomes a snake. A curve becomes the back of a horse. That's why animals begin to appear, often in abstracted, morphing forms. They shimmer, they flicker. They aren't literal. They're seen. And stage 3? That's where things get strange. This is the stage of full trance. The self dissolves. The boundary between body and world disappears. People report flying, traveling through tunnels, merging with animals, dying and being reborn. The stuff of dreams, myths, and cave walls. That bird-headed man? He might not be a man at all. He He might be a shaman, mid-journey. Transformed, he wears a bird's head because in this vision, he is the bird. He has taken flight, crossed into the spirit world. The bison with spilled entrails is not just a creature. It's an obstacle, a gatekeeper, a trial. The rhinoceros is not passive. It's not even real. It's symbolic, a guardian, a counterforce, something that turns away from the conflict, perhaps marking the limits of the trance. And the broken spear? Perhaps that's not a weapon at all. Perhaps it's a signal that the journey failed. The shaman didn't return. He died, not in flesh, but in spirit. Some trances are too deep. Some visions are too strong. In this theory, the shaft scene isn't a hunting story. It's a religious psychodrama, a visualization of death and transformation. The bird-headed figure is the traveler. The bison is the trial. The stick bird is the anchor, the tether to the waking world, now severed. Fringe? Maybe. But this theory explains something most others don't. Why the scene is so weird. Why it doesn't follow narrative logic. Because it's not narrative. It's neural. This also helps explain the rest of the cave's layout. Why did people crawl into these tight, dangerous spaces to make art? Because that descent itself mirrors the shamanic journey. Down into darkness, through narrowing tunnels, into chambers where the boundary between worlds is thin. Sound, vision, orientation, they all shift. Time loses meaning. You're not in a cave anymore. You're in a state. And when you finally arrive, exhausted, breathless, pulsing with adrenaline, you paint what you saw. You record the journey. Not for others necessarily. Maybe not even for yourself, but for the spirits, for the wall, for the echo that demands to be answered. This lens also changes how we see the other strange figures. The therianthropes, the hybrids, the half-man, half-beast silhouettes lurking in deeper chambers across Europe. These aren't monsters. They're travelers, pilgrims in the language of trance. In Gabelou, a bison man raises his arms as if in ecstasy. In Trois-Frères, a horned figure crouches and dances on the wall, a creature with antlers and eyes like an owl. These aren't mistakes. They're rituals, frozen in pigment. The people who made them weren't confused about what was real and what wasn't. They lived in a world where the boundary didn't matter. They didn't think in binaries. Human, animal, dead, alive, sacred, mundane. They thought in spirals. And caves, with their winding paths and echoing chambers, were the perfect mirrors of that mind. Historians still argue whether the shamanic model applies universally. Some say it's overreaching, a modern framework projected onto the unknowable past. But others point to the consistency of the evidence. Across continents, the symbols repeat. The visions rhyme. So maybe the shaft scene isn't about death. Maybe it's about something older. A journey, a crossing, a price. And maybe, just maybe, the man with the bird head didn't fall. He flew. Now that your mind has slipped loose from the usual, from the tidy categories of man and beast, fact and story, you're ready for the next chamber. Not a literal one this time, a mythic one. You've seen the bird-headed man, the shaman mid-journey. But he wasn't alone. Not really. He's part of a larger, stranger world. A world where the lines between human and animal were not just blurred. They were deliberately erased. You're going now to the cave of Trois-Frères, the Three Brothers. Tucked high in the French Pyrenees, it's one of the deepest and most difficult caves to access in all of Europe. Not difficult like steep stairs, Difficult-like, army crawling through tunnels that pinch your chest, climbing up polished rock chimneys, wedging between pillars of stalactites and flowstone with your face sideways. Why go to such lengths? Because deep within that stone labyrinth lies a creature, and he's been waiting for you. He's not on a grand panel. He's not easy to find. You have to crane your neck, squint, tilt your lamp just so. But once you see him, you'll never forget him. High up on the wall, above a ledge, he crouches. He's called the sorcerer. And he is breathtaking. He has the antlers of a reindeer, branching like trees from his head. His eyes are large, wide, owlish. His torso is human. But the limbs? Ambiguous. He has paws instead of hands, clawed feet instead of toes, and a long trailing tail wraps around behind him, like a horse's or a lion's. And his posture? He dances, or prays, or stalks. Historians still argue what he's doing, and who he is. Is he a god? The horned lord of the Paleolithic? Or is he another shaman, someone who has donned the skins of animals to embody their power? Look closely at him. There's nothing crude about this figure. He's detailed, thoughtful, expressive. He wasn't an afterthought. He was central, and he isn't alone. The sorcerer is the most famous, but the cave is filled with hybrids, human-animal amalgams. A man with a bison's head, a woman with deer legs, figures with tails, beaks, tusks, claws. These aren't mythological creatures in the modern sense. They're not part of a pantheon. They don't carry names we know. But they were important. Important enough to risk your life crawling into darkness just to depict them. Why? Because to these people, becoming an animal wasn't strange. It was sacred. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. Not in the way modern science demands, but in the way the mind believes. In trance states, shamans across cultures report feeling themselves merge with animals. They don't pretend to be the bear. They become the bear. They feel the weight of fur, the breadth of lung, the power of claw. It's not play acting. It's transformation. And so, on the walls, we see that moment of metamorphosis caught mid-act. These aren't monsters. They're thresholds between life and death, between human and spirit, between world and underworld. One fringe theory suggests that these hybrids are not even individuals, but roles. That the sorcerer wasn't one man, but many over time. An office passed down through generations. Each new practitioner adopting the same image, the same antlers, the same dance. A lineage of guides through the veil. The existence of these figures also reframes everything else we've seen. Remember that strange aviform at Pech Merle? That bird-shaped placard? Maybe it wasn't a signature. Maybe it was a mirror, a symbol of who the dead man became. Not a victim, but a spirit returned. Or take the bison with the spilled entrails in the shaft scene. Maybe that wasn't a failed hunt. Maybe it was a necessary sacrifice, a gatekeeper spirit offering passage, and the birdman accepted the cost. You're beginning to see the full cosmology now. Not a pantheon, not a religion as we know it, but a world view, a way of being in the world. A belief that the cave is not just a space, it's a skin. That painting is not just expression, it's communion. That when you draw the animal, you summon it. And when you merge with the animal, you become something more. This is a world where art wasn't passive. It was active, dangerous, charged. You weren't just telling a story. You were casting it. And you weren't alone. You, the artist, were surrounded by spirits, by ancestors, by visions clawed from the rock itself. That's why the sorcerer dances on high, because he presides, not just over the cave, but over the boundary, the one between this world and the next. You can almost hear him now. The echo of hooves and breath, the crack of bone drums, the shuffle of feet. And in the silence that follows, something wilder, a voice without a mouth, saying, "You are not what you think you are. Not just meat, not just mind, something older, something layered." You tilt your lamp upward one last time. The sorcerer stares down. Not cruel, not kind, just waiting. You back away from the sorcerer, lamp low, breath slow. Not because you're afraid. Well, not just. But because your perspective has shifted. It's no longer about the images themselves. It's about where they are. Why here? Why underground? Why paint these scenes in places no sunlight ever touched? Where you have to crawl, climb, contort your body through tight, bone-scraping tunnels. Why not paint on the cliff face, or a tree, or a hut? Why descend into the belly of the earth? The answer might be simple, because the cave meant something, not as shelter, as passage. You begin to realize that the cave itself is part of the story, not a canvas, but a co-author. You walk further in, down a winding corridor, and your steps begin to echo oddly, not just bounce, but hum. The cave seems to resonate back at you. This isn't poetic license. It's measurable. Welcome to the strange science of archaeoacoustics. Researchers have taken sound mapping tools into these Paleolithic chambers and made a discovery. The paintings often appear in spots where the acoustics are unique, echo-rich, resonant. Some even vibrate when sound is produced, like a drum. In short, the best paintings are often in the best-sounding places. Historians still argue whether this correlation is intentional or coincidental, but it's hard to ignore. In some chambers, a simple hum or clap creates deep, belly-rattling echoes that seem to rise from the walls themselves. Now imagine that, in flickering lamplight, with painted eyes watching. This suggests something powerful. These weren't just places to look. They were places to listen. You can almost hear it now. A chorus of low voices, the beat of a bone drum, someone blowing through a hollow reed, the pulse of footsteps on stone, and then, slowly, a chant, repetitive, hypnotic. You are not a visitor here. You are a participant. And the cave? The cave is an instrument, a sacred one. Think about what it takes to get here. The descent, the squeezing, the narrow turns. By the time you reach the chamber, you've already passed a test. You've earned your place. One theory holds that these sites were used for initiation rites, that the journey inward mirrored the journey into the self, from daylight to darkness, from boy to man, from one life to the next. And what better setting than this womb of stone? The cave is a liminal space, neither here nor there, a skin between the world of the living and the world of spirits. You didn't just paint on it. You opened it. Modern researchers who've studied cave surfaces describe them in reverent tones. The way the minerals reflect light. The way the walls shimmer when wet. The way some curves seem to suggest shapes before the artist ever picks up pigment. It's as if the walls were already alive, waiting to be uncovered. Some indigenous Australian traditions speak of ancestral spirits who painted the land from within, and whose images emerge when the right ritual is performed. What if Paleolithic artists believed something similar, that they weren't creating art, but revealing it? That the animals were already in the cave. They just needed to be brought forth. That's why some panels use the rock's natural bulges, because the artist didn't want to impose. They wanted to collaborate. This changes everything. Suddenly, the act of painting isn't an expression of ego. It's a negotiation with spirit, a calling, and perhaps a danger. Because to open that veil, to reach into the world beyond, meant you had to give something up. Maybe time, maybe safety, maybe blood. It's not hard to imagine that some of the injuries in these caves, broken ankles, torn shoulders, weren't accidents. They were part of the cost. The cave asks for a price. You think back now to the images of the pierced men. Maybe they weren't victims of murder. Maybe they were volunteers, sacrifices, chosen not because they failed, but because they succeeded. One fringe interpretation even suggests that the crude human figures weren't drawn that way because of taboo, but because they were already gone. Their souls had passed through. What you're seeing isn't a person, it's an echo, a husk. And perhaps the artist didn't paint to preserve life, but to release it. That's why the lines are so sharp. That's why the bird heads are so strange. Because this isn't a language of surface, it's a language of thresholds. And the cave was the temple where those thresholds were crossed. Think of it now, from a distance. A hillside, a dark mouth in the rock. You don't stumble into it. You approach it, with purpose. And when you go inside, when you light your lamp and bow your head and descend, what you're doing is older than memory. You are walking into a wound in the world, and you are listening for what bleeds through. You're deeper now, not just in the cave, but in the mystery. And something has shifted. You can feel it. This isn't about paintings anymore. This is about stories. Everywhere you look, the evidence is layered. Not random sketches, not isolated doodles, but sequences, compositions, panels, like scenes in a book. Which brings us to another theory, one that stands beside shamanism, not in contradiction, but in conversation. Maybe these walls are not just spiritual, maybe they're mythical. Not visions of individual trance, but shared epics, oral histories pinned in place. A visual library. Let's try that lens on the shaft scene. The bison is the beast, the test. The birdman is the hero. The broken spear is the failure. The bird on the stick is the soul, departing, ascending, remembering. It's not a death. It's a lesson, a myth. A tale passed down and retold, not with ink or alphabet, but with pigment and silence. This theory is rooted in something universal. Humans tell stories. We always have. Before writing, before books, we had only our voices, our breath, our memory. But memory is fragile, so we built scaffolds for it. Songs, rhythms, and pictures. Mnemonics. And maybe that's what the caves are. The world's oldest storyboards. Imagine this. An elder stands in front of the painted wall. A circle of children sit at their feet, firelight flickering. The elder gestures to the bird-headed man. This, they whisper, is what happened when the hero crossed too soon. When he forgot the rules. When he failed the test. The painting is the cue, not the story itself, but the index. You've probably used something similar yourself. A family photo that reminds you of a long, rambling story. A scar that calls back a childhood memory. The cave is full of these scars. These memory triggers. Genevieve von Petzinger, a researcher who catalogued hundreds of cave signs across Europe, found that many of them repeat. Symbols like spirals, ladders, and triangles that appear over and over in different places at different times. That's not random. That's a system. Not quite writing. Not yet. But close. Some believe these signs are the first step toward a symbolic language, a code for who, where, when, and why. A kind of proto-syntax, built from ochre and bone. And if that's true, then the caves are more than temples. They're archives. Religious, yes, but also historical, political, cultural. One fringe theory goes even further. It suggests that the caves are an early constitution, not just stories for entertainment, but codified rules for behavior. That scene of the pierced man? It's not just a myth. It's law. This is what happens when you break the rules. And those rules? They weren't written down. They were painted. Because paint survives. Through flood, through famine, through forgetting. Even now, it's here. Still speaking. Even if we don't understand the language. Some believe each major cave site tells a different part of the whole. That Lascaux, Chauvet, Trois-Frères, Pêche-Merle, they're not isolated sanctuaries, but chapters in a great unwritten epic. That if we could piece together the symbols, the characters, the recurring animals, we'd begin to see the shape of a story told across generations, across centuries, across ice. A Paleolithic mythology, not just of gods and monsters, but of people, of who we were, who we feared, who we longed to become. Think about it. No other species paints like this. No other creature tries so desperately to remember itself, to make memory durable, to pass it on. Even the decision to go into the cave itself is telling. To hide the stories in stone, far from sun and storm, where no animal could claw them away. Its preservation, intentional and sacred, like sealing a book in a vault, or a secret in a whisper. Historians still argue whether this was really history, in the way we mean it. Maybe it wasn't about what happened, but what should be remembered. And maybe that's more important. Because the caves don't preserve facts, they preserve values. They tell us what mattered. The animals, the thresholds, the death, the flight. You pause in front of a panel now. It shows a line of horses, heads overlapping, legs in a blur, motion somehow captured in stillness. Above them, a series of dots. Below, a square. On the far wall, a crude human figure with hands raised. What is it? A story. A myth. A ritual. Or maybe all three. Whatever it was, someone believed it had to be remembered. And here you are, thousands of years later, still listening. You step away from the myth, just for a moment, because while it's tempting, deeply tempting, to lose yourself in visions of shamans and story keepers, there's something more uncomfortable to face. Something drier, quieter. It's a simple, thorny question. What if we've been reading the images all wrong? What if those lines, the ones that pierce the stickmen at Cognac, at Pêche-Merle, aren't spears at all? What if we've mistaken metaphor for murder? This is where the whole theory starts to wobble. Not because the images aren't strange and powerful, they are, but because we're human. And humans are really, really good at seeing what we want to see. The lines in those images? Yes, they look like weapons. Yes, they radiate from the body. Yes, they're positioned in places we associate with wounding. Torso, arms, legs. But consider this. Those same types of lines appear elsewhere too. Not just with humans, not just in violence. They show up around animals, around shapes, around symbols. So maybe they don't mean what we think they mean. Here's one alternative theory. The lines aren't physical at all. They're spiritual. Representations not of pain, but of transition. Maybe they mark a soul leaving the body, a boundary crossed, a kind of energetic rupture, not a spear in the ribs, but a beam of essence moving from this world to the next. Some believe these figures show a shaman mid-transformation, not dead, awakening. In this reading, the body is simply overwhelmed, not by violence, but by vision. And those sharp lines? They're not wounds, they're pathways, conduits. Then there's the acoustics theory. Yes, that one again. Yegor Reznikov, one of the leading voices in archaeoacoustics, suggests that some abstract symbols, including lines and grids, may represent sound. Resonance, the visual impression of echo itself. This sounds bizarre, until you remember that in trance states, sound and vision often merge. People see what they hear. Dots become pulses, lines become rhythm. So now imagine a figure surrounded by lines, not as pierced, but as ringing, filled with sound, caught in a storm of spirit. Is it a death or an epiphany? Historians still argue fiercely over this point. Some insist the lines are literal, others symbolic. Some say they're accidental. Erosion, later markings, overpainting. One researcher even suggested they were practice strokes. That theory was not popular at conferences. But let's go deeper. Let's look at the abstract signs that cover the walls. You've seen them. Dots, ladders, hatches, grids, rectangles, little squiggles that look like parentheses made by a drunk spider. For decades, these were ignored, left out of books and museum tours. They weren't art, after all. They weren't bison or horses or ghostly lions. They were just lines. But then came researchers like Genevieve von Petzinger, who took a different approach. She catalogued them, site by site, continent by continent. And what she found? Patterns. These shapes repeat. Across time, across caves, across languages, in El Castillo, in Chauvet, in Lascaux. The same 32 signs appear again and again. That doesn't happen by accident. It suggests a system. Not quite an alphabet, but perhaps a kind of symbol set, a precursor to writing, a way of marking who made the painting, or what it meant, or when it was made. Maybe the clever form, the key-shaped symbol, means ritual. Maybe the tectiform, the rectangle with legs, means home, or family, or warning. Maybe the lines around the stick figure are an annotation. This is sacred. You're staring at a code. And we don't have the Rosetta Stone. One fringe theory even suggests that the paintings and the signs work together, as a kind of layered text. The image is the noun. The symbols are the verbs. So that pierced figure, maybe the image says person, and the signs say traveled, or transgressed, or transcended. Or maybe the reverse. Maybe we've spent centuries staring at the picture, when the real message was the lines beside it. It's humbling, isn't it? To realize that everything you've seen, every meaning you thought you held in your hands, might just be a projection. That the most terrifying paintings might not be about death. They might be about life, about power, about transformation. You lean closer now. The lines don't quiver. They don't blink. But they're there, sharp, still, uncompromising. They don't care what you think they are, but they'll let you wonder, because that's what they were made to do. You sit down now, just sit, not to rest, but to reflect. Because for all this talk of symbols and spirits and spears and sound, we still haven't asked the simplest question of all. Who made this? Not in the abstract, but really, tangibly. Who crouched in the dark, lamp flickering, breath shallow, hand trembling with cold and awe, and chose to paint this bison, that bird, those strange lines? Who dipped fingers in ochre? Who climbed scaffolding to reach a vault of stone? Who walked miles through blackness to place a single horse on a single wall? Let's talk about the artists, because they were people, just like you, just like me, only not. Let's begin with a hand, a literal one. You've seen the stencils, ghost hands sprayed onto stone, palms pressed flat while pigment was blown through a hollow bone. Red, black, ochre. Dozens of them, sometimes whole panels filled with nothing but hands. Reaching, hovering, touching the stone. They used to be assumed male. Because, well, of course they were. Right? But then came the measurements. In the early 2000s, researchers started looking at finger ratios. Index to ring, palm width, wrist span. And they found something shocking. A majority of these stencils didn't match adult men. They matched women and adolescents. Yes, teenagers. It's not definitive. The data is fuzzy. Hands are tricky. But it suggests something huge. That art wasn't the domain of a single gender, or age, or role. It was shared, communal. This wasn't a priestly class working in secrecy. This was a cultural act, a family act, and these people had tools, more than we often credit them with. To make these images, they needed pigment. That meant collecting minerals, hematite for red, manganese for black, kaolin for white. These weren't just lying around. They had to be mined, traded, processed. They ground them with stones into fine powders. Then they mixed them with fat, or water, or spit. They applied them with moss, with feathers, with fingers. They engraved lines with flint blades. They lit the darkness with stone lamps, filled with animal fat, fed with wicks made of twisted plant fibers or moss. Some even used scallop shells. Yes, like tiny ancient oil lamps. And how did they reach the ceiling? How did they paint across 10-foot-high chambers? They built scaffolding. At Lascaux, there's physical evidence. Holes carved into the wall, wood residue preserved by mineral deposits. Temporary wooden frames raised to let the artists rise above the earth. Above themselves. This wasn't a casual pastime. This was labor. Deliberate, skilled, dangerous. And some of these works, they're huge. The Great Hall at Lascaux is over 60 feet long. Some panels contain hundreds of images, layered, intertwined, evolving. And they weren't made all at once. Radiocarbon and uranium-thorium dating tell us something astounding. Many of these caves were painted across millennia. The horses at Pechmerle, roughly 25,000 years old. The handprints beside them, closer to 19,000. That's 6,000 years of difference. To put it in perspective, the time between those two artists is longer than the time between us and the construction of the Great Pyramid. Imagine painting something And then your great-great-great, times 100, grandchild returns to that spot and adds their own. That's what these caves are. Not frozen moments, but conversations across time. One fringe theory even suggests that some of the overpainting wasn't accidental, that it was ritual, a deliberate layering, not to replace, but to respond. Here is your horse, the new artist says, and here is mine. The wall becomes a family tree, or a city of ghosts. And yet, despite all this effort, none of them signed their names. No artist marks, no painted by Thog scribbled in charcoal. Why? Maybe because authorship wasn't individual. Maybe because the act of creating was sacred, and sacred things don't belong to people. Or maybe because they were signing, just in a language we don't recognize. The shape of a bison, the curve of a symbol, the flick of a line. They didn't need credit. They needed continuity. And think of what this means for how we see ourselves. These people didn't have metal, they didn't have cities, they didn't have writing, but they had art. And that tells us something deeper than any tool ever could. It tells us they had imagination, memory, belief, fear, love. They saw the world, and they wanted to respond, to leave something behind. And here you are, thousands of years later, listening to them. They made something for the ages, not because they thought they were great, but because they knew time was. You run your fingers across the stone now, gently, as if it might answer back. Because after everything you've seen, birdmen and bison guts, therianthropes and trance maps, you're starting to understand something. These images are old, really old, not just old like ancient Egypt or Roman ruins. Old like the Ice Age, old like glaciers still crawling across Europe, like cave bears still snoring in the next chamber. But how do we know? How can we be sure these aren't Renaissance forgeries, or Neolithic doodles, or just some bored shepherd from 3,000 years ago with an early charcoal hobby? Let's talk science. Let's talk how we know. First up, radiocarbon dating. You've probably heard the term before, maybe in a documentary with dramatic music and slow zooms on lab equipment. Here's how it works. All living things absorb carbon, specifically a radioactive isotope called carbon-14. When they die, they stop absorbing it. And over time, the carbon-14 decays at a predictable rate. So if you measure how much is left in, say, a piece of charcoal, you can estimate how long ago it stopped being part of a living thing. And here's the trick. A lot of Paleolithic cave artists used charcoal-based pigment. Burnt wood, burnt bone, materials that were once alive. When scientists scrape tiny samples from the black outlines of a bison or the faint shadow of a human, they can date the pigment itself, not the rock, the art. This gives us a minimum age. This painting is at least X years old. But sometimes that's not enough. Enter uranium-thorium dating. This one sounds intense, and it kind of is. It doesn't date the pigment. It dates the calcite, the thin, transparent mineral crust that forms over time on cave walls. When water trickles down rock and evaporates, it leaves behind tiny layers of calcite, like a natural glass. If a painting has been overgrown by this mineral veil, scientists can date the formation and get a maximum age for when the art was made. So let's say the calcite layer is 19,000 years old. That means the painting beneath it? It must be even older. When radiocarbon and uranium-thorium dates line up, boom. We're in business. You've got a narrow window that says, with real confidence, this bison was painted 21,500 years ago. Give or take. It's not magic. It's math. And what the math tells us is staggering. Some of these paintings, Chauvet for instance, date to around 32,000 years ago. Others, like the panels at Pêche Merle, are younger, around 19,000. Lascaux, roughly 17,000. That's a 15,000-year stretch of artistic tradition, longer than the entire span of recorded history, as we usually define it. Which leads to something quietly astonishing. These caves weren't decorated all at once. They were revisited, generation after generation, centuries apart. In some cases, millennia. Imagine that. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather painted a horse, and you, 2,000 years later, return to the same wall, same chamber, same echo, and you add another, a new symbol, a second figure, a reply. That's not just art. That's a conversation across time. A dialogue between the living and the remembered. Each painting becomes a kind of message, etched in pigment, waiting in darkness for the next voice. It also means meaning may have changed. A symbol painted in 28,000 BCE might have meant one thing then, and something entirely different 5,000 years later. Think about how our symbols evolve. The swastika, the cross, the peace sign. Meaning is slippery, which is why reading the caves is like decoding a palimpsest, layers of meaning written over each other, some visible, some faint. But what doesn't change? The need, the drive to make the image, to leave a mark. To say, I was here, this mattered, remember. And the more you learn, the deeper the timeline stretches, the more humbling it becomes. Because we're not looking at one moment. We're looking at an entire civilization, one with no cities, no roads, no written language, but with stories, rules, visions, and artists. Some may have lived 500 years apart and still painted the same panel. That's like a modern artist collaborating with Leonardo da Vinci. Only these artists never met. They just trusted the wall, trusted that someone would come after, that someone would see. You did. And now maybe you understand a little more about the weight of what you're seeing. Not just pigment and stone, but time. Layered, breathing, alive. You're coming back now, not out of the cave, not yet, but pulling back inside your own mind, making space, letting everything settle. The wounded men, the bird-headed shaman, the echoing chambers, the slow drip of calcite over millennia. It's all starting to add up. Not to a conclusion, but to a feeling. Because when people talk about the terror of these caves, they don't always mean monsters. They mean recognition. Let's take it apart. First, there's the terror of violence, the sheer horror of looking at a painting that might be a murder scene. Not a lion attacking prey, not a chaotic hunt, but human-on-human violence drawn carefully, methodically, like a message. You look at the stick figure with the spears through his torso, and your brain whispers, "This is us." It's not some distant evolutionary cousin with a different brain. This is you, stripped down. Same hands, same eyes, same capacity, for beauty and for cruelty. Second, there's the terror of complexity. These weren't primitive people. That word, out the window. These were minds with layers, with gods and fears and laws and arguments, with art and music and initiation rituals and abstract thought. You've heard the story. Once upon a time, humans were simple, peaceful, noble savages. Then came farming, property, war, taxes, cruelty. Wrong. The darkness wasn't invented by civilization. It came before. The fear, the ritual, the death sentence painted on the cave wall, all of it was there already. Before metal, before empires, before written words. And that brings us to the deepest fear of all, the terror of the unknown. Because for all your theories, all your science, all your neatly catalogued pigment samples, you don't know what it means. You never will. You're staring into a mind as smart as yours, but shaped by an utterly different world. They lived in darkness, in silence, in bone and fire and dream, and they left messages, but not answers. There's no key, no translation, only echoes, and that's terrifying, because we hate not knowing. It reminds us of how little we truly understand, even about ourselves. Why do we hurt? Why do we believe? Why do we need to mark the wall? What if those caves were never meant to explain? What if they were meant to contain the unexplainable, to bottle mystery, to hold it, keep it safe in the earth, where the sun can't burn it away? Historians still argue whether this is overthinking. Maybe some paintings were just art. Maybe some dots are just dots. Maybe a bison is just lunch. But you've been in the cave now. You've felt it. And you know. There's more. The deepest terror is that these people weren't strange at all. They were familiar. Too familiar. They made art to feel less alone. They told stories to hold off the night. They punished. They prayed. They carved beauty from darkness. They wondered. And when they couldn't make sense of what they saw, or dreamed, or did, they painted it anyway. So you'd see it. So you'd remember. So you'd ask. What kind of species does that? Only one. Ours. You are the last character in their story. The final dot on the cave wall. The one who walks in, holds a lamp to the stone, and tries, desperately, lovingly, imperfectly, to listen. And what you hear isn't horror, it's recognition. You turn now, slowly, not in fear, not in haste, just with the knowledge that it's time. Time to leave the cave. But not forget it. The path is narrow again. The stone presses close, cool against your shoulder. Your footsteps echo less here. The sound is swallowed, like the cave knows you're not meant to speak yet. You retrace your steps, past the panels of horses, past the dots, the stags, the bison mid-charge. You duck through the same squeeze you crawled through before, your lamp guttering in the draft that signals the nearness of air, of life, of light. And as you climb upward, inch by inch, you pass the ghosts of every image you've seen. You think again of the pierced figures, of the way their arms fell, of the stillness in their fall. Were they punished, honored, transformed? You still don't know. You probably never will. But you remember them, and maybe that's enough. You pass the laddered signs, the bird-head man, the solemn sorcerer. Not as myths now, not as symbols, as people, as intentions. And somewhere in your chest, that tightness you've been carrying, the weight of trying to understand, softens a little. Because you realize something simple. The cave didn't want you to solve it. It wanted you to witness it. Outside now. The sun is different. Harsh at first. Your eyes squint. The sky feels too big. The wind too loud. Birds call in the trees like nothing has happened. But you know something has. You've been underground. Not just in earth, but in time. You've carried the torch. You've felt the weight of a 20,000-year-old brushstroke, of a breath held for eternity. And here's the most beautiful, terrifying, humbling truth of all. We don't know why they painted that figure with spears through its chest, or why they carved a man with the head of a bird, or what the aviform means. And maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe the point isn't to solve the cave. Maybe the point is to sit with it, to let it live, to feel, in your bones, that long, slow echo of someone else's thought, still pulsing through stone and soot and silence. To remember that you are not the beginning of anything. You are the continuation. The final act of this whole experience isn't analysis. It's wonder. Because standing there at the cave mouth, blinking into daylight, you finally get it. We're not above the mystery. We are the mystery. We've always been the ones with painted hands and restless dreams. We've always been the species that climbs into darkness, just to leave behind a trace of meaning. A horse, a line, a figure, a question. And now, as you walk away, that question follows you. Not loud, not urgent, just quiet, patient, the same way it's been waiting for 20,000 years. Was it murder? Was it myth? Was it magic? Or was it something deeper than all three? You may never find the answer, but you've done something just as rare. You've listened, you've looked, you've wondered. And in doing that, you've joined the story. You've become part of the painting. The final mark on the wall. Now, lie back. Let the weight of your blanket return. Let the air around you shift. Softer now, like moss instead of stone. Let your breath slow. You've traveled far tonight, not in distance, but in depth. Through tunnels and echoes, through silence and pigment, through images older than memory, and questions older than language. You've carried a lamp through darkness, and you've come back, not with certainty, but with curiosity. Let that curiosity linger a little longer. Let the images drift, a horned figure crouching on a ledge, a trail of dots leading into shadow, a human falling, maybe dying, maybe dreaming. A handprint on a stone wall, not waving, not reaching, but simply being there. Let your mind hold that stillness. Let the mystery settle into you, not as fear, but as peace. Because not knowing isn't failure. It's freedom. It's space to wonder. It's the soft, ancient truth that some things were never meant to be solved. Only seen, felt, remembered. So as your eyes grow heavier and the shapes of the cave fade into the shapes of sleep, carry this with you. You are the last torchbearer of an unbroken story. One of reverence, of ritual, of art. You are part of a lineage that doesn't just survive, it remembers. Good night, fellow traveler. Dream softly, dream deeply, and let the walls keep whispering.